And we had about 9 people RSVP, so I'm not sure how many we'll officially have on, but we should have a good size group here. Hello, everyone. Welcome in. We'll give it just a moment for people to join the Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome in from the Conservation Lands Foundation.
What?
Hello, everyone. To everyone who's joining, welcome in. We're going to give it just a moment to let all of our participants add. Just a quick reminder, if all of our audience could put their mute setting on, that would be great, just to make sure we can hear all of our speakers. Thank you again for joining us today. We're so happy to have everyone here. We'll give it maybe one more minute and then we'll start the program as the rest of our audience continues to join. And while you are joining, if anyone would like to introduce themselves in the chat, you're welcome to pop that in there. And why don't we get started? So thank you everyone so much for joining our special event today, A Vision for Impact, how a 21st century climate conservation corps will strengthen nature's resiliency and local economies. It's so great to see many familiar faces. And for anyone who is new to the Conservation Lands Foundation, our mission is to protect, restore, and expand the national conservation lands through education, advocacy, and partnerships. My name is Paige Ladazinski. I am our Associate Development Director for Strategic Partnerships. Today, there are presenters coming in from many areas here. So I wanted to offer our land acknowledgement for all of our speakers coming in from the Bay Area, Durango, Colorado, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Washington, D.C., here from the Conservation Lands Foundation team. So today we are very excited to welcome Colorado Congressman Joe Neguse to discuss how conservation corps programs can help protect critical landscapes and provide opportunities for local communities. Also joining today's program are Chas Robles, who is the Ancestral Lands Conservation Corps Director. Hello, Chas. We have David Feinman, Government Affairs Director at the Conservation Lands Foundation, and Greg Moore, who is one of our Conservation Lands Foundation Trustee Emeritus, who will be moderating our conversation today with the Congressman. So welcome all and a huge thank you. We'll begin in just a moment, but just a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. Please remain muted throughout the program, and you are welcome to place any questions throughout the program in the chat. We will have time for a short Q&A later in the program, so feel free to pop anything into the chat feature if you'd like to ask a question. Lastly, this conversation will be recorded and will be emailed out to our participants afterwards, so stay tuned for the link for the recording. The recording will also have closed captions. So welcome, Congressman, and all of our participants. And Greg, I will now turn it over to you.
Thanks, Paige. And first, my thanks to everyone for being part of this conversation today. And Congressman Neguse, we are so honored to have you join us today. I'm truly grateful for your leadership as chair of the House Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands. We'd like to start with any opening remarks that you might like to make, and feel free to introduce yourself in more detail or share more about your work.
Thank you, Greg, for the very kind words. Certainly appreciate it. It's wonderful to be able to join all of you today. And I first want to say thank you to the foundation for all of the incredible work that you do each and every day to protect the public lands that we hold in trust for the generations that will succeed our own. And of course, all of you on today's call, I want to say thank you for your commitment to preserving our public lands, for your passion and your engagement with respect to public lands conservation. And certainly there couldn't be a more important time to be engaged on these issues than today, as we face so many consequential challenges. Of course, the principal one, the most existential one of all, being climate change, which I know we'll talk a bit about today during the conversation. As was mentioned, I represent Northern Colorado, the 2nd Congressional District, which spans a geographical area the size of the state of New Jersey, everywhere from our central mountain communities, the best skiing in the world, Vail, Breck, Winter Park, wonderful public lands and national forests like the White River National Forest, the Arapahoe Roosevelt National Forest, and of course, the Rocky Mountain National Park, which is a crown jewel of the national park system. And I also represent Boulder, Fort Collins, and major metropolitan areas in Northern Colorado. I serve as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Public Lands in the United States Congress, which means I have the unenviable task of trying to fill the very big shoes that were left by my colleague and my friend, Secretary Deb Haaland, who of course is a trailblazer in her own right, made history multiple times over, and we're so excited that she continues to be at the helm at the Interior Department and to be a great partner to all of her friends back in the United States Congress. And we've had a very busy agenda this year, as Greg alluded to, working very hard with the Biden administration and with the Democratic Senate to again put a priority on preservation and conservation of our public lands and to restore, in our view, the natural balance that had been so impeded and undercut by the prior administration and a number of officials that former President Trump had appointed during his time. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk with all of you today about not just the Climate Conservation Corps, but of course, other issues more broadly around public lands. And I look forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you. Maybe we can start, Congressman, by having you tell us a little bit more about the goals of your legislation and how you and Senator Wyden, the Senate lead on this bill, realized that this legislation was needed.
Sure. Well, the idea, as it were, really occurred to us and I think to Senator Wyden simultaneously, as our country and our respective states were dealing with a multitude of crises, kind of this confluence of challenges that were happening simultaneously. In the case of Colorado, it was the dual challenge of course, the public health emergency that is the COVID-19 pandemic. And a year ago, as we all can very much recall, the significant economic disruption that was taking place, the reality of an unemployment rate that had doubled literally overnight, coupled with the incredibly dangerous and destructive wildfires that were raging across my district, across my state, and of course in Oregon and across the Western United States. In October of last year, there were 5 wildfires all happening simultaneously in my Northern Colorado district, including the first and second largest wildfires in the entire history of Colorado, both of which were a mere 10, 15 miles away from each other at one point. Those fires, there's no question that the intensity, the velocity of those fires was catalyzed by climate change, that it's a direct impact, a direct consequence of climate change in terms of the drought conditions that are exacerbating wildfires in the West and making them more pervasive. And as I said, far more intense, posing a real threat to our livelihoods and ultimately our lives. Those two challenges, in my view, presented a real opportunity for us to think creatively in terms of how we address both. And the CCC framework struck me, and I think struck Senator Wyden, and struck many others, as a perfect reference point for how we could potentially address these problems in the 21st century. Of course, many of you are no doubt familiar with the Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s, a Depression-era program that at that time was conceived by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration to address a set of consequential challenges, namely the Great Depression and the terrible economic catastrophe that the Depression brought at that time for our country. And so they created this program that was wildly successful. Of course, we see the remnants of that program across the country and here in my state. Some of you who visited Colorado are no doubt familiar with Red Rocks, which is a wonderful musical venue nestled beneath the foothills. It's an architectural masterpiece, and it was built by folks in the CCC. You can still visit today the barracks, as I have, where the young men worked and literally built this incredible amphitheater. And of course, much of our public trails network and public lands infrastructure was built by the CCC. So the structure, or the idea, I guess, as it were, was fairly simple. It was to reimagine the program of the 1930s and implement it for 2021 to address the challenges, as I said, that we are facing today, to put to work a new generation of folks on our public lands, to address the deferred maintenance that exists in our national park system, to engage in the really labor-intensive and critically important work of reforestation and wildfire resiliency and mitigation, wildlife habitat preservation, protecting our watersheds, and so much else that we know has to be done on our public lands. That, in a nutshell, was the idea. And we're very excited that it has gained momentum over the course of the last year. It has captured the imagination, I think, of the American people, many whom have read about the 1930s era program and are excited at the notion that this could yet again be implemented for the 21st century. And of course, there are many programs, which of course you all work with closely, that are doing this type of work today, but they are underfunded. And our hope is that we can scale up their efforts as part of our larger proposal. So that's how we conceived of it. And we're now full steam ahead in terms of working to try to get it enacted into law.
Thank you. We certainly can see how the legacy of the Civilian Conservation Corps has moved through the generations and how much we benefit from it today. And I'm convinced that the CCC that you're promoting and advancing will have that same multi-generational legacy. Just a little background and then a question. Our Friends Grassroots Network includes about 80 local nonprofits that steward the Bureau of Land Management's national conservation lands. Many of these groups have shovel-ready projects, whether trail maintenance, invasive species control, or trash cleanup. And with funding, they're ready to move forward to hire additional staff. And some of these groups directly partner with conservation corps, and others function locally with their own volunteers to complete stewardship projects. So perhaps you can tell us how your bill and really broader congressional efforts to create the CCC will provide resources to ensure that more people get out to work on BLM's public lands to protect and restore and conserve the national conservation lands.
It's a great question, Greg. Our bill is multifaceted. So we try to get at this particular problem in a number of different ways. First and foremost, of course, we use the traditional AmeriCorps infrastructure and try to scale up their efforts. And there's a portion of the money that is within our CCC bill that we've introduced with Senator Wyden, as well as, I should say, the bill that we've introduced with Senator Coons, who, of course, is an AmeriCorps alum himself, to try to scale up those programs. But in addition, our bill includes upwards of roughly $40 billion for various Forest Service and Department of Interior operating accounts that essentially would be project-based funding. And the agencies, DOI, USFS, Department of Agriculture more broadly, BLM, wide variety of other agencies within those two principal departments, would have the latitude, the discretion to be able to, working with local stakeholders and other relevant officials, determine which projects merit the most funding and to, from there, figure out the best way to apportion that funding stream. And so I would not be surprised if perhaps some of the projects that you mentioned may very well end up being the types of projects that the Department of Interior or that the United States Forest Service would be interested in seeing taken to their completion. So that's how the bill works in a nutshell. I should say it's important to us that the CCC program of the 21st century remedy the defects within the original program. And the most principal defect, in my view, and I think the view of many of my colleagues, is that the CCC program of the 1930s was a very exclusive program and largely cut out wide swaths of our country and did not reflect the rich diversity of the American workforce. That will not be the case with President Biden's Climate Conservation Corps, where we have placed a premium on diversity and on equity. And so ultimately our hope is that the folks who are working on these projects, again, will reflect as I said, the rich diversity of our country. And so we're very excited about that particular component piece as well. And that is sort of baked into the base language of the proposal in terms of how we are considering various grantees, how the agencies rather consider various grantees and so forth.
I'm very pleased to hear about that. I think conservation corps really help diversify the conservation movement in our country, and certainly through conservation corps is a great avenue and goal for that. And we'd of course be honored to work with you to ensure that the 21st Century Conservation Corps ensures funding for local nonprofits, some that are within your state, like the Dolores River Boating Advocates or Colorado Canyons Association, or the Western Slope Conservation Center in Colorado, and other groups across the West who steward BLM's national conservation lands. As a next question, maybe you can tell us how those participating in this community conversation and other supporters of ours to engage with Congress and the administration to express support for your efforts, particularly in the House and Senate, as you consider this bill. How can we help? What can we do to support you and your efforts?
Well, I suspect that the other panelists today will have a better insights as to the best ways for you all to effectuate your voice and ensure that your voices are uplifted in support of the program. I'm always hesitant.
Oh, good.
To offer any advice in that regard. I would just simply say that government only works when it is responsive to the people and to the people's priorities. And that responsiveness is only present when there are open lines of communication. And so I would encourage all of you, to the extent you have ideas or suggestions, both about how this particular program should be structured or more broadly about some of the climate change and public land efforts that are pending in the United States Congress, I would encourage you to reach out to my office, to the office of your representative, to the extent that you don't live in Colorado's 2nd Congressional District, because hearing from you matters a great deal. And it certainly makes our job, it makes the work that we do much more impactful when we've actually taken the time to listen to local voices who, 9 times out of 10 have a far better sense and understanding of the issues that we are actually debating, because of course they have a subject matter expertise and are living it and breathing it every day. So I would encourage you to do that. And of course, I would encourage you to make your voices heard in support of this program to the extent that you support it.
Well, thank you for that invitation. I'm sure many of us will follow up. And again, we really applaud your leadership as chair of the Subcommittee on Public Lands and your efforts to provide legislation to protect public lands that are worthy of conservation. You mentioned Secretary Holland, and we're really honored that you're working closely with her. And of course, we are as well, to encourage the importance of BLM's lands in a broader effort to conserve 30% of America's public lands by 2030. Maybe you can share some of the work your subcommittee has done so far and what you have planned maybe for later in this session to ensure the House protects BLM lands that are vital to local, state, and national conservation goals.
Sure. Well, I am an enthusiastic supporter of the America the Beautiful plan that the president has articulated. It is, as you mentioned, largely premised on the 30 by 30 effort, which we were proud to be a supporter of and a co-sponsor of, an early co-sponsor of the resolution in the House in that regard. I think that they have now put some meat on the bones in terms of, when I say they, the administration, the Department of Interior, on what America the Beautiful 30 by 30 will really look like in practice. And to me, essentially, it will be the collection of local efforts at conservation. Very much conservation efforts are on our public lands driven at the local level, involving stakeholders of every shape and every size to ultimately ensure that the public lands preservation that we are engaged in is reflective of the communities that call these public lands home. And a good example of this is the CORE Act, which is a bill that I'm very passionate about. Some of you who are Coloradans are likely familiar with the bill. Senator Bennett is the primary sponsor in the Senate. a bill that would preserve 400,000 acres of land in our state, incredible, iconic places, a withdrawal of of lands from mineral development, and as well as any number of other pieces without getting into the details. So with respect to your particular question about how the subcommittee is working to try to achieve the America the Beautiful framework, we are doing it one lands package at a time. And we've been marching down that path all year. We passed earlier in the year a very large package of Protecting America's Wilderness Act that essentially includes, I believe, 8 different public land provisions across the United States, California, Nevada, Arizona, the Grand Canyon, of course, the CORE Act, other parts of Colorado. An incredible effort to try to protect more of these treasured public lands in our country, including wilderness, of course, but also, as you said, BLM land, and strengthening the national park system and the assets within the NPS system. So we'll keep doing that. We have, I would venture to say that our subcommittee is probably one of the busier subcommittees in the United States Congress, because we are constantly marking up and hearing different legislative bills to try to preserve more areas of our wonderful country. And I'm going to continue to push and try to be as aggressive as I can in that regard. And of course, again, I would encourage all of you, would implore you really, to the extent that you have ideas, I hope you'll let us know. There's a group, they may be on this call, of folks who had raised with us the prospect of finishing and essentially enhancing the Continental Divide Trail. And that's a project that we're now working on, and hopefully a bill that we'll be introducing in short order. So if there are other protections that are important to you that you think we ought to be considering, I hope you'll let us know.
Well, your vision and ambitions are inspiring to us, and it's a time of so much opportunity, but also great urgency as well. So we stand ready to be supportive in any way we can. And now we have about 5 to 10 minutes for questions from others who have joined us conservation. So I think we'll move to that portion of the agenda. Paige, are you moderating this piece of it?
Yes, so if anyone has an additional question for the congressman, please feel free to pop it into the chat. And then David, I'll turn it over to you to field the questions.
Thanks, Paige. And I see 1 or 2 popping in, and we'll see if another 1 or 2 come in the next minute or so. But in the interim, Congressman, I figure maybe I'll throw you a little bit of a softball question. I believe you're in your 2nd term in Congress. What led you, once you came into Congress, to choose to make conservation your bailiwick and what you would jump into in such a leadership role so quickly? Something about your life or your experience before you came into politics that led you to do that?
Well, my experience has been that the most effective work in the Congress is typically done by members who have both a vested interest in the work that they are performing, and that interest is also consistent with the interests of their constituents. That marriage, if you will, sort of confluence of interests, is really important. And so, from my perspective, I, as you know, I've lived almost all my life in Colorado. I've lived here since I was 5 years old. Some of my most treasured memories are, hiking in Rocky Mountain National Park with my dad, and being able to enjoy our wonderful outdoors, and to now have the privilege of representing those same places is pretty extraordinary, and certainly a privilege to me. And I also, so I say that, I guess, a long-winded way of saying I've always cared a great deal about conservation and about preserving our wonderful public lands in Colorado, which are core to our way of life as Coloradans. But I also represent a district that's 52% public lands. That is the epicenter for outdoor recreation and the outdoor recreation economy. That is home to some of the world's leading scientists who are doing cutting edge work in our renewable energy laboratories and various other research institutions in trying to carve a path forward for our planet to survive the onslaught of climate change. And so as a result, as I said, these issues, protecting our environment more broadly, public lands conservation, and the fight against climate change have always been very personal to me, but they are also very personal to my constituency. And so as a result, it's been a blessing to be able to have the opportunity to work on issues that give me personal joy, and that I know also mean a great deal to the people who have given me the privilege of representing them in the Congress.
When we really appreciate your personal passion for this beyond the professional interest. And very good question from Denise Joynes from Wilberforce Foundation. She asked, are there conversations in Congress about how the CCC could in effect operationalize the America the Beautiful plan and its priorities, especially by restoring biodiversity and ecological functions?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great point. And actually, I'm going to pass that along to my legislative team because this question came up yesterday as well in a different context. But the Great American Outdoors Act has, of course, been incredibly important, and you're starting to see much of the project funding begin to come to fruition in different parts of our country. But there still is a gap, both in terms of funding, but also in terms of administration, to be candid, in terms of how those projects are kind of coming to life, as it were. And so yes, I think that's a great point. There's a synergy there between the CCC program and operationalizing the various projects that we had hoped would be funded under the Great American Outdoors Act. And so I think we're going to have to work through that as we go through the reconciliation process here in the next 8 weeks to make sure that any overlap isn't redundant, and at the same time that we're not leaving anything on the table.
Yeah, and I think to that point, as Greg mentioned earlier, the groups in our Friends Grassroots Network are kind of that nexus between the idea behind the core and the operationalization of America the Beautiful. So we're certainly happy to work with you to kind of figure out how to help Congress find that sweet spot. And a question from Christine Canali, in terms of the CCC and wildfire mitigation, will there be a specific focus on the wildland-urban interface? She said there's a lot of scientific debate about salvage logging in the interior of the forest and its actual benefits to the soils and ecology of the area. How will mitigation and logging be prioritized? Yeah, those are great questions. And, I have seen some of the articles that I think the questioner is referencing in terms of the efficacy or the utility of some of the mitigation work. The broader answer to the first question is yes. Certainly there will be a focus on the WUI. And I say that as somebody who obviously I have an institutional bias towards addressing those issues because I represent a district that, again, is probably one of the better examples nationwide of what the WUI looks like when you think of major metropolitan areas like Fort Collins and Boulder and Estes Park and of course the mountain communities that I represent as well. So I do think there is a need. I mean, and again, I think part of the way that I have framed this with my colleagues in Congress is that, to me, the most important thing is to follow the science. And I say that with respect to climate science. And in my view, the decisive, significant action that we need to take on a much more expedited timetable in light of, well, we've known that for quite some time, but certainly confirmed by the IPCC's report on Monday. I also say that with respect to how we are managing our forests and engaging in that mitigation work. And it may be, again, science isn't static, right? It's constantly, new research is coming out that's peer reviewed, and so it's important for us to consider that and then to try to make sure that we're addressing any nuances that flow from the new scientific research that we're privy to. So I am certainly committed to that. And, I think we're going to have to kind of chart a path. There's no doubt that there is work to be done in the WUI with respect to mitigation and some of the fuels that exist in our forests. I also think that there's, on the same side, in the same regard, there are those who simply say you just have to get a rake and rake out the forests, or these pithy remarks, to me, are completely divorced rather from science. So anyway, I think that's the way that I've sort of approached it, and certainly always open to more conversations on that front. Thank you for that. And Greg, I think we're wrapped up with the Q&A. So if you want to finish up this part of the agenda.
Yeah, sure. First, thanks to the audience for your interest in your great questions. And Congressman, we are really so truly grateful that you joined us today, and your leadership on the Climate Conservation Corps as well as so many opportunities and challenges that face our public lands mean a lot to us and to future generations. So we all wish you the very best as you advance the many ways that public lands can serve the American public. And as we mentioned, we're grateful and stand ready to be supportive in any way that we can. And thank you. I know your time's at a premium, and the fact that you joined us today means a lot to us.
Oh, thank you. Thanks again for the opportunity, and best of luck. And please keep up the wonderful, phenomenal work. Look forward to partnering with you in the future. Take care.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, the Congressman's team. And now for the remainder of the program, we're excited to hear more from both Chas Robles and Greg Moore about how we can put conservation programs to work and a little more of the practical side of what we do on public lands. So I'm going to turn that back over to David.
Thanks, Paige. And we got a chance to introduce Chas earlier and Greg, obviously, but Chas, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to doing this work that you're doing, and some of your current projects at Ancestral Lands Conservation Corps.
Thank you. My name is Chas Robles. I'm Chicano, Mexica ancestry. My ancestors come from the central Mexico region. And I am the Corps Director for the Ancestral Lands Conservation Corps. I grew up in Colorado, so it's great to see Congressman Neguse representing Colorado so well and being a great advocate of the Civilian Climate Corps and conservation work in general. I came to conservation work in 2006 after graduating college and doing some nonprofit work centered around fundraising for environmental groups. I saw the great work that environmental organizations were getting done on the ground, and I wanted to get my hands dirty and get involved in doing that direct work. Funding it was really impactful, but I just wanted to be involved in that direct work and see the direct impacts of that work. So I went out to the Mojave Desert in Southern California and worked on a 10-month Desert Restoration Corps crew with the Student Conservation Association. And it was life-changing, literally life-changing for me. I'd gotten a degree in English, wanted to become a high school English and literature teacher and have impact on young people's lives in that way. And joining the Conservation Corps changed the trajectory of my life and helped me to see the impacts that I could make on young people's lives, as well as the environment and our communities. And I've been in the conservation world ever since, except for 1 year. I helped my brother open up a bicycle shop in Seattle, Washington. But other than that, I've been either a member on a crew leader, or a staff person for various corps across the country. I've worked with Student Conservation Association, the Rocky Mountain Youth Corps out of Steamboat, Colorado, Southwest Conservation Corps in Southern Colorado. And then I've been with the Ancestral Lands Conservation Corps since 2013. And the Ancestral Lands Conservation Corps is a pretty unique corps in that we work with all Indigenous youth and young adults. We have 5 program offices. We were created in the Pueblo of Acoma in 2008. And since then, we've partnered with other Pueblos and tribes and communities to open up offices that serve the Diné or Navajo youth and young adults out of Gallup, New Mexico. We have a program office in the Pueblo of Zuni, the Hopi Nation, and then I'm based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, traditional Tiwa lands. And we have a program that serves urban Native and Indigenous youth and young adults, as well as partnering with some of the surrounding Pueblos around the Albuquerque metro area. And we also have an individual placement program that focuses on more professional partnership and conservation opportunities. It's essentially kind of like an intern program, bringing in young folks with very specific experience and oftentimes degrees in the fields of archaeology, biology, botany, engineering, and other various conservation related fields. I love the work that we get done in conservation corps and in the communities that we create and the impacts that we are able to have on our young people. So.
Great, thanks for that insight, Chas. And oops, sorry for the background noise. I'm not sure why that's happening, but Greg, we know that you have also worked extensively with core groups throughout your career. Can you tell us about some of your successes and lessons learned over your vast experience in this world?
Sure, but I'll start by telling Chas how much I love this story because thousands of youth of all backgrounds over time around the country have been transformed by their Conservation Corps experience and found that their life's trajectory changed. I've seen it in action throughout my career. Early on, when I worked for the National Park Service, I managed Youth Conservation Corps and Young Adult Conservation Corps programs. Later on, I worked directly with one of the first state conservation corps, the California Conservation Corps, on restoration projects in national parks and public lands in California. And then also I live in a county in California that created the very first local conservation corps, the North Bay Conservation Corps. And my wife was the founder of the San Francisco Conservation Corps. So conservation corps have been a part of my life. And not only do I take pride in their accomplishment, but I take joy in what they do for young people and the effect they have on people's careers and their futures. I would say in terms of successes, just go out in our public lands and look. There's probably in every place you go, a conservation corps project that has been completed that you're unaware of. In my case, whether it was restoring Prissy Field in the San Francisco shoreline or miles of trails in Mount Tamalpais State Parks. And then again, I'll just say the youth development picture has really emerged in so many ways with the Public Land Corps Act that you can move young people from conservation corps work directly into federal employment relatively non-competitively. And I've seen, in my case at Golden Gate, the frontline ranger force was completely transformed to be the most diverse ranger force in the country, I believe. They speak close to 20 different languages. And without the Conservation Corps as the feeder program to that hiring capability, that goal would not be achieved. So I think I'll just speak to the ability of conservation corps to achieve the diversity, equity, and inclusion goals that we all share.
Thanks for that, Greg. And I think I'll just reflect on your point and even Chaz's point about how it changed his direction professionally in his life, where I think we're at a point in the labor market where a lot of people are trying to figure out what they want to do with their life, basically. And so the creation of a program like this right now is really opportune for millions of people who are at a kind of a junction in their life where they really want to do something they're passionate about, like Chas and you were able to do. So it really couldn't be more timely for Congress to be considering this. And this is a question for both of you. Can you tell us a little bit about the original Civilian Climate Corps or Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s and how you see what Congress and the administration are considering now, how it's different from the original program? Maybe I'll start with Greg and then Chas can tail on.
I would say, first of all, there's a much larger scale and diversity of public lands. So the need is even more present than it was, many, many years ago today. And of course, we have additionally the pressing issue of climate change, which is of this generation in a place where conservation corps can have a big impact. And finally, I think as I mentioned, the conservation corps have developed in a way that they really are a ladder to employment and conservation careers for young people. And I don't think that was CCC, the original CCC was more considered a way to put people to work until the economy recovered. But I think the Conservation Corps movement today is an ongoing way of doing business to bring young people into the conservation field.
Yeah, Greg, that was the first thing that came to mind, is that the original CCC was really based on jobs and infrastructure, and obviously climate change being the biggest issue of our current generation that we need to address. I think that's an opportunity for the new Civilian Climate Corps to really incorporate that aspect and not only get great infrastructure projects done, create improved access to public lands for everybody, but also to really engage the next generation of conservationists in addressing climate change. The congressman also mentioned that we have the opportunity, Corps have done the work of diversifying who is involved and engaged in the conservation movement. And I think that this new CCC has the opportunity to continue and build upon the great work that conservation corps have done to create a more inclusive and diverse conservation cadre and cohort of young conservationists. You know, and the original CCC was predominantly white men, I think exclusively white men in the beginning, and then slowly expanded to include other races, and then well down the line to finally include women. But that took a long time. You know, the conservation corps these days are doing incredible work around engaging diverse groups of folks from all different walks of life and creating space that is safe for them to engage in the conservation movement. The various affinity crews and affinity models across all different conservation corps right now is really inspiring to see that. As somebody who came up through the conservation movement, not participating in affinity space, it was challenging oftentimes being the only person of color. And seeing where we're at 15 years from when I started, it's really incredible to see the spaces and places that have been created and really devoted to broadening who can be involved in these types of programs, not just based on race, gender, sexuality, but income too. I think that's a big gap that we continue to see, as a lot of these programs aren't necessarily accessible to folks who are struggling to make ends meet economically. And I think that's some work that we can continue to do as well. And in recognizing the service that our participants are doing to our public lands and for our environment, and compensating them in a manner that makes it more accessible and allows people to get their foot in the door in these experiences and see a real career for them to continue in these fields.
Yeah, thanks to both of you for your answers on that. And I think I'll just note that it's important that our federal land management agencies also reflect the diversity of our country and the people who enjoy and want to protect public lands. And I think to both of your points, for better or for worse, the fact that the federal agencies have lost a lot of people over the last few years, there's an opportunity to fill those jobs in the coming years with people who do truly reflect the diversity. And these programs could be a way to help introduce people into that career. And Chas, what are some of the biggest challenges? You've already spoken about this at some level, but what are some of the biggest challenges you face in your work, and what would best help your work going forward?
Well, yeah, I just mentioned what we pay our members. We are an AmeriCorps affiliated program, and AmeriCorps is an incredible partner, and it provides great benefits to our participants through the Segal Education Awards. That helps young folks pay for college tuition and other associated fees to continue their post-secondary education and achieve certifications. It's a great benefit to them. There are also limitations in what we can pay them that are imposed by AmeriCorps. And what we can do, what we have the opportunity to do is increase that maximum living allowance for our Corps members, so that, you know, the conservation service, national service, doesn't have to be something that keeps people in poverty. It's the opportunity for folks to give back to our communities and to our environment while being able to get ahead economically. So, you know, we're advocating for $15 an hour for our Corps members, and that would require that AmeriCorps increases those maximum living allowances, as well as addressing many of our federal agreements. We're cooperative agencies, but there is a required match that we have to provide, 25% match. And so reassessing that, reevaluating that, and either decreasing that match to 10% or getting rid of it altogether would greatly allow us to increase the wages that we're able to offer to our participants and really show economic value as a society of the work that our young folks are doing. I think one of the other big barriers that we have is continued funding for in-community projects. So the vast majority of our projects are on public lands, in national parks, on national forests, on BLM lands that are either adjacent to communities or in the quote unquote wilderness. And that's all really powerful work. That's the work that I came up through the Conservation Corps doing. It had great impacts on me and it continues to have great impacts on our participants. But we also see the need to do that same type of work, restoration, building accessible trails in our communities. And that also makes outdoor recreation, conservation, environmentalism more accessible to all Americans and all folks who live in our communities. From an economic and environmental justice standpoint, we talk about, bringing these conservation work to the places that we live, work, play, pray, and learn. And those are those remote areas, and they're also those areas that are in our backyard. So creating more of those in-community opportunities to do this type of work is something that we'd like to see continue to be prioritized as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Chas. And we're now open for Q&A for Greg and Chas. So if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, please put it in the chat. And I'm happy to facilitate that. I think I'll also just note for folks while we're waiting for questions, and we can perhaps include this link in what we send out after this, is that Chas recently testified in the House Natural Resources Committee, actually the subcommittee that Congressman Neguse chairs, to talk about this very issue. And so I think to the point of the question that was asked of the congressman earlier today, advocacy is really important on any issue in public policy that you want to see move forward. But obviously, whether it's being able to testify in front of members of Congress like Chas has and other members of our Friends Grassroots Network have, or just picking up the phone and calling your congressman or sending them an email, I can attest as somebody who used to work on the other side as a Hill staffer that it does actually have an impact. So you should certainly do that. Paige, do we have any questions at this point?
Doesn't look like any have come into the chat yet, but please feel free to pop any in if you'd like to ask either Greg or Chas any additional questions. Chas,
maybe while we're waiting, I'll just comment on Chas's observations, because I think with a program like AmeriCorps, once the federal benchmarks are set for wages and stipends, it's much harder to change than it should be. And I agree, it's fundamental that gets updated, because otherwise we have a program that is inaccessible to young people, and that's not really the point of it. And secondarily, the AmeriCorps program, Chas maybe want to comment, it's administratively challenging. I mean, for a small nonprofit to take AmeriCorps grant money requires an institutional infrastructure that is often a stretcher or needs to be significant. So there may be some ways to streamline that portion of AmeriCorps as well.
I will not argue with you on that, Greg. It can be very administratively burdensome to manage AmeriCorps programs. It is, again, it's an incredible program, and it's done incredible work over the decades that it's been in existence, and helped to impact many young people's lives and well, all types of people, because there's some great programs. Senior Corps works with 55 and up, citizens 55 and up, and just really, really impactful programming that AmeriCorps does across the country. But I agree with you. I think how do we make it less burdensome administratively, and really allow programs like Conservation Corps and other programs that are doing this work focus on doing the great work that we can get done on the ground.
And the other point you made is if we are asking youth and local communities to care about their public lands, then it makes sense that we have to care about the communities adjacent to public lands. So there needs to be some level of reciprocal investment for that partnership to really be to have integrity and effectiveness and sustainability.
Great, thank you both. And question for Chas, but also for Greg, do you have any other advice that you would offer to young people that want to just get more connected to conservation work and the conservation movement? What do you wish you'd known when you were that age?
Yeah, well, I wish I found conservation corps after I had graduated college. And I wish that I had known about them in high school. There's plenty of corps across the country that offer programs, paid programs for high school students. And we even run programs for younger elementary and middle school youth through our hiking clubs and explorers clubs that really reconnects young people to the land, public lands, takes them out hiking, gets them exposed to responsible recreation, how to do it safely, gets them excited about going out into their public lands, and also reconnects them culturally to those spaces and places, talking about the cultural and historical significance. So there's that connection to public lands that hopefully fosters that lifelong commitment to protecting our public lands and natural world and environments. And then that deeper level of cultural reconnection too, that hopefully just takes them, even deeper into that commitment of protecting those places. So I would encourage young folks to look locally or even nationally, because I know a lot of programs. I led high school crews for Rocky Mountain Youth Corps, and we had a good mix of young folks from Colorado and from across the country that were coming into that program. So if it's something that folks are interested in participating in, there's a lot of resources out there that can help you find a local or even national type of program. And then I would just encourage young folks to get out on our public lands, go hiking, go biking. I'm very fortunate. I live a block and a half away from the Bosque on the Rio Grande. And so I take my dogs out, I walk, I bike, and just getting that reconnection to nature. I think that's one of the biggest benefits that core programs provide to our participants is reconnecting in nature, that grounding, just that silent space, that outdoor physical recreation is a great way. It helps me in a lot of different ways to get out on public lands, to get out in nature, and just encourage young folks to make those connections.
My advice is similar. Really the Conservation Corps Network has grown to offer programs in all localities for people of all ages, and with many different degrees of commitment, from the Student Conservation Corps, which is I think more high school directed, to programs for seniors and others. So it could be, Chas, you might be able to help me here. I think there is an organization, called the Core Network, that maybe has a list of all those conservation core programs around the country. So one place to start might be on that website if you're searching for what's nearby where you live.
Absolutely, that's a great place to start. And there's also a bunch of, Greg, you mentioned a lot of the local corps that you've been integral in help founding. And some of those hyper-local corps are not yet part of the Core Network, but Core Network is a great place to start. And then, we call them Grandfather Google. Just type it in wherever you're looking to join a conservation corps. Just type that in and see if something comes up. And I do want to mention Skylar's comment here. I think it's a great comment that you made. And I know I recognized your name, Skylar, so it's great to have you participating on this call. Our hope is that all of these, all the support, the legislation that is supporting the work on public lands also includes tribal lands. And when I talk about in-community programming, that's exactly what I'm talking about, is we want to see more of our Dene crews staying on the Nebekea, Navajo lands to do that work, because it's needed there just as much as it's needed in the national parks and national forests, the public lands. And so we would like to see that. I just saw today the Senate Budget Committee passed the budget resolution that includes money for a Native civilian climate corps. So I think between that and the Indian Youth Service Corps that has been funded, we will see a lot more of this money going, staying on tribal lands and getting, allowing our crews and other programs to do this work on tribal lands.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Chas. And the key, I'll spare everybody the legislative 101 lesson, but that was a budget framework. So the key is now for the House and Senate to actually plug in the programs and the funding. But yes, the idea behind that was included in there. So hopefully that will properly guide Congress to do things like that as they work through how to spend a few $1 trillion. Paige, do we have anything else?
Just wanted to mention the question about STEM, and I don't know if any of us really have the answer for that in terms of the specific focus on biology and environment under science as part of STEM. But I think for me, just getting more young people out in these places and connected to the land and having foster appreciation for plants and wildlife and natural resources. I think we'd have to turn it back to the congressman or anyone involved in direct curriculum for adding a B or an E. But if Chas or Greg have any other thoughts on just student engagement.
What was that question, Paige?
So Christine asks about, asking students who are interested in STEM, and the students said that they weren't very interested in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but would there be a way to fold in biology and environment to maybe pique more of that interest?
Well, many conservation corps in the goal of serving the whole young person build curriculum into their programs. And I would imagine it would touch some of the subject matters brought up. Also, conservation corps often have collaborative programs with local community colleges or even universities, so that as young people go through the conservation corps, their next pathway is available to them. So in a broader context, I would imagine at some level, all those topics are included in the Conservation Corps network.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes through just the connection that young folks make by serving, doing project work in various public lands for continued amounts of time, that those natural opportunities come up for folks to learn about, especially ecology, biology, environment, just a lot of those environmental sciences. And I would add also, Greg touched on this, we're working with a few universities and colleges within the region to create more structured, accredited opportunities for young folks, including with Western Colorado University, a ladder program for folks to be able to earn credit through participation in our programs, and also create a pathway to earn a master's degree in environmental management. So I think that question is right on point. There's a lot of opportunity for young folks. I think oftentimes when we think about sciences, a lot of that emphasis is on not necessarily the environmental fields, but obviously we need that investment to address climate change and continue all the work that's necessary in the environment.
Thanks so much to both of you. And a huge thank you to our audience for joining today. We're so glad you had a chance to meet the congressman and engage in this discussion. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Chas. Thank you, David. And thanks to all of you for your support of the Conservation Lands Foundation. As we mentioned, this conversation will be recorded, so we'll be sending it out afterwards if you'd like to share it among your networks. So thanks again, and we hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, y'all. Take care.